Time. Got it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chicago IANDS. Wow, what a day this has been. What a week this has been. What a month this has been. What a year. My God, this has been an incredible year. And in all kinds of strange ways. But today was the kind of pinnacle for me. I'm in pain because I just broke my foot, my big toe or my foot. I don't know which, but it's all swollen and sore. So if I make faces, you'll know why I'm scowling. But we're going to take a minute and kind of go within and do our brief meditation with flute. And so if you're in your chair, get yourself comfortable and allow yourself to begin to relax yourself from top to bottom or bottom to top, whichever you like to do. And gradually let your eyes gently close. Welcome back. Wow. I was just saying, for those of you who just got here, what an amazing time this that we're going through is, and how interesting and how earth-shaking it is in so many ways. I've been leading this meeting now since May 98 when I started it. That's, what is that, 8, 9, 23 years. It'll be 24 years next May. And every month. And I've had incredible help from the other side in terms of getting the right speakers and everything falling into place just like it's supposed to be. For whatever reason, this is not happening right at the moment, and I'm not exactly sure why. So we are booked through next month, and I'm not sure what's going to happen after that. You're going to have to stay tuned to find out, because I'm still willing to do it, although I'm getting getting old. But I won't do it without my help from the other side. So we'll see what they come forth with. Another thing that's happened today, which has never happened before, is our speaker has become ill and is not going to be here. So Dr. Bruce Greyson, who's been a friend of mine for more than 20 years, he is close to my age. We're in our 70s. And he's beginning to wear out too. And so he's going to have to take a little break. It's possible that he might be able to somebody is ringing my doorbell. This has never happened before. I don't know what the heck's going on. This is the craziest day. At any rate, he sent us a wonderful interview with Barbara Morningstar that he did recently about his new book called After. And after, of course, refers to what happens when we leave the earth and go home. And it's a great book. He's a wonderful author, a wonderful speaker. And this is a very enlightening interview. And I am going to have Vicki play it for us. And we will then have a chance to discuss it afterwards. So save your questions and you can put them on the chat line, and we'll bring them up after the lecture is over. And we can you can put comments, whatever you want to say about what you're watching, and we'll talk about it afterwards. Oh my gosh.
If everyone could turn off their sound, that would be awesome.
Turn off, mute yourselves, and let's go with it, Vicki.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll talk afterwards. Have a good time, everybody. Enjoy.
Bear with me.
We practiced this. We did. We and it works.
We're good.
Welcome to Inspiring Heartfelt Conversations, presented by Ann Autumn's Cocoon, in which we explore a range of end-of-life topics with noted professionals. My name is Barbara Morningstar. Today, I'm excited to have as my guest
fish to eat.
she could not be aroused. So I talked to her roommate who had brought her in, a room about 50 yards down the hall, and then went back to see the patient again, and she was still out cold. So she was admitted to the intensive care unit overnight. And I went to see her there the next morning when she awoke. She was still very, very drowsy, could barely open her eyes. And I started to introduce myself, and she stopped me and said, "I know who you are. I remember you from last night." That kind of startled me. So I said, "Gee, I'm surprised. I thought you were out cold when I saw you last night." And then she looked me in the eye for the first time and said, "Not in my room. I saw you talking to my roommate down the hall." That just blew me away. I couldn't imagine what she was talking about. She was talking as if she had left her body and followed me down the hall. And as far as I could tell, I was my body. How can you leave? It didn't make no sense at all. So she saw that I was kind of stumbling with this, and then went on to tell me about the conversation I had with her roommate, what we were wearing, where we were sitting, all my questions and her answers. And it made no sense at all to me. But I had to, I was there to do a job with her. So I kind of pushed my feelings aside and tried to focus on her issues, her suicidal thoughts and so forth. And then in the days that followed, as I tried to reflect on this, I just didn't make any sense to me. So I tried to tell myself it was a trick of some kind. Maybe the nurses were trying to fool me. I was a young green intern, and it just didn't make any sense. And then about 4 or 5 years later, Raymond Moody wrote a book called Life After Life, in which he gave us the term near-death experience and described what they were like. And it occurred to me for the first time that this thing that this patient had talked to me about was not just a one-time thing, but was part of a huge phenomenon that people all over the world were having. It still made no sense to me. I couldn't understand it. But that made me go towards it. As a scientist, my job was to understand things. Mm-hmm. And you make the greatest advances in science by trying to study things you don't understand at all. And this was certainly one of them. So I started collecting cases and trying to understand it. And here I am 50 years later, still trying to understand it.
It's beautiful to see how it sort of led you into a life's body of work.
Yeah.
And the University of Virginia, we touched on it just before we started recording, such a unique department with that kind of reflection of an exploration with children and their sensitivities and people at end of life too.
Yeah. Slightly more than 50 years ago, Chester Carlson, who invented the Xerox process, gave the university a huge bequest to start this division to study the possibility that something may survive bodily death. And Ian Stevenson became the first director of that group. And he was focused mainly on young children, preschool children, who claimed to remember past lives. And he eventually collected some 2,500 of these kids who gave information that could be verified about their past lives. And of course, I was working with near-death experiences in this division, and other people who worked with other phenomena that related to the mind-brain issue, and suggesting that the mind was something other than just what the brain does, and in fact may survive after the brain stops doing its thing.
Well, so beautiful, because the sensitivity of children is so enlivened at young ages. And as in the work I do in hospice, we see that sensitivity open in a different way as people near death, right?
Yeah. It's like we have this shell that we build up around us as we, quote, mature, and sort of walls off all the spiritual realm that the children are aware of. And then as you approach death at the end, it's like that wall starts crumbling again. And you once again become sensitive to this other realm.
So that leads beautifully into my next question about perspective.
Yes.
Can you speak to the way perspective is different when individuals are in the midst of the experience?
Well, of course, in the midst of a near-death experience, you're really not relating to this world very much at all. Many people will start by leaving their bodies and looking down from an out-of-body perspective. In fact, many of them are startled to see their bodies down there and are puzzled by it. Some don't even recognize it for a while. But they quickly become distracted by other things that seem much more important to them. What we now call the spiritual realm, for lack of a better word. They get a sense of something much larger than themselves. Many of them talk about a warm, loving being of light that radiates unconditional love. And then they will review their lives often, see deceased loved ones, come to some assessment of their own lives as they go through the life review. They almost never talk about being judged by some other entity, but they talk about judging themselves and deciding what was meaningful and fulfilling in their lives and what wasn't. And this is something that we often do with patients who are facing the end of life. We guide them through a life review to sort of help them reach perspective on what their life was worth and what was most valuable about it. But people do it spontaneously in a near-death experience. And when they come back from the NDE, of course, the near-death experience, they use that information to sort of make a course correction in their lives and point in a more fulfilling direction than they had been going before.
So can you expand a little bit on the life review? I found it fascinating listening. I did the audio version of the book about experiencing both sides of that. It's quite profound. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. Maybe 30 or 40% of people who have a near-death experience will report a life review in which they see virtually everything in their lives in a matter of seconds from our perspective, and it's in eternity from their perspective. There's no sense of time in the near-death experience. But many of them report seeing and reliving the experience, not only through their own eyes, but through the eyes of other people involved in the scenes. For example, one fellow, Tom Sawyer, was a laborer who had a near-death experience in his 30s when a truck he was working underneath fell and crushed his chest. And in that near-death experience, he reviewed his entire life. And he reviewed it not only from his own perspective, but through the eyes of other people as well. An example was he remembered an incident when he was a teenager and driving his new truck down the road, and a drunk man happened to wander out in front of him and almost hit his truck. And Tom was furious because he almost dented his truck. So he stopped the truck and rolled down the window and started yelling at the man. And the man, being intoxicated, reached his arm in the truck window and slapped Tom across the face. That was just too much for this hot-headed teenager. So he got out of the truck and started beating the man mercilessly and left him a bloody mess on the median divider, and then got back in his truck and drove away. Well, when he had his near-death experience, he relived this through his own eyes, feeling the adrenaline rush and the rage, but also through the eyes of the drunk man. And he felt that man's humiliation at being beaten by this little teenager. He felt his nose getting bloodier. He felt his teeth going through his lower lip. And he just felt everything through that man's eyes as well as through his own. And when he came back from the near-death experience, he felt, without any question, that we are all interconnected. And what you do to someone else, you do to yourself. When you hurt someone else, you're hurting yourself. When you help other people, you're helping yourself. And, one after another, near-death experiencer tells me, yes, it is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself, as you have them do unto you. But for them, it's no longer a guideline they're supposed to follow. They understand it now as the law of nature, like gravity. That's just the way things are. The way you treat other people is the way you yourself are treating yourself. That's tremendously powerful.
Well, and so the beauty of it too, seeing that there's no judgment in this, just sort of a realization of a responsibility around the act and the impact of it on the individual as they're in the midst of it. So suicide, that was interesting too. You hear about all these beautiful worlds, and then these people have completed suicide to try and get away from here. You think, when they come back, they're going to do it again.
Exactly. You know, when I first started hearing from near-death experiencer after near-death experiencer that what happens after death is beautiful and wonderful, I started worrying that, you know, as a psychiatrist, we're going to make people more suicidal by telling them this. So I did a study, and I interviewed everyone who was admitted to my hospital after a suicide attempt. And I compared those who had a near-death experience as a result of the suicide attempt with those who didn't. And what we found, to our surprise, was that those who had a near-death experience were much less suicidal than those who didn't have an NDE, which certainly seemed counterintuitive. I had known lots of people who were thinking of ending their lives, but were deterred because they were afraid what might happen. And if you take away the fear of death, what's to stop them? But the near-death experiences told me that when you lose your fear of dying, you also lose your fear of living. Since you're not afraid of losing your life, there's nothing holding you back from jumping in with both feet, taking risks, you know, taking chances and enjoying life to the fullest, which gives you a life that's much more meaningful and fulfilling than you had before. You still have the same problems, but now they see them as learning opportunities. They understand that they are part of something greater than themselves, and their own personal problems are seen in a different perspective now.
Well, I shared with you that beautiful, someone referenced this years ago, Turn of the Carpet, this old song and poem from the 1700s about two weavers. And such a beautiful metaphor, if anyone gets a chance to look up that poem.
Yes.
About how we don't, in the entanglement of the human side, we don't get to see that higher view, but the intricacy and the delicacy and the perfection of the weave of the carpet in the tapestry is breathtaking, you know, from that higher perspective.
Yeah. And many near-death experiences will say that when they were in the NDE, they got to see things from the other side of the carpet. And they saw the beauty in things that look random to us here. And when they come back, they may not remember or understand everything they saw, but they remember that it did make sense on the other side. And they remember that there was a meaning and purpose to everything. Anita Morjani gives them the metaphor of living in a dark warehouse where you can't see anything, but you have a flashlight and you can shine the flashlight around and see things here and there. And then all of a sudden, someone turns on the light in the warehouse and you see row after row after row of stuff that you didn't even know was there. And then the lights turned off again, and there you're back in the darkness with your little flashlight, and you can't see those things, but you remember that they're all there. That's what NDEers are like. They've seen it from the other perspective, and even though they can't see it now, they know it's there.
Okay. So language. What type of language do people use to try to explain these experiences?
Well, almost every near-death experiencer says when you ask them, tell me about your NDE, they say, I can't, you know, there are no words for it. You know, the words can't describe what I went through. So of course we researchers say, that's great, tell me about it. You know? So we know that we're making them distort the experience by putting it into words. So they end up using metaphors, and most of the metaphors are from their religion or from their culture. So that introduces some cross-cultural variation in what people say to us, but not in the experience itself. For example, people describe this warm, loving being of light all over the world, and they have been doing this for centuries. We have accounts from ancient Greece and Rome that sound just like NDEs we have today. But people in the US and Canada who are raised in a Christian society, well, they may call that being of light God or Christ. And you don't hear people from Hindu, Buddhist cultures using that word. But even here, many people will say, you know, I'm going to call it God, so you know what I'm talking about, but this wasn't the God I was taught about in church. This is much bigger than that. But they have to use some word for it. So they use the religious or cultural metaphors for it. And they know that that's not what it really is. And they tell us that's not what it really is either. So they're all using metaphors the way people who are facing their own end of life will use metaphors to describe the trip they're about to take.
Mhm. Yeah, we see that all the time. It's beautiful. It's very poetic, and it can be drawn on the life experiences. And if you're not attuned to the metaphor, you can miss a lot of things, right?
Right.
So that's beautiful. So how about within the experience itself? Are words used to communicate when people are in the exchange within the near-death experience?
Well, it's funny because we don't talk to them in the ND. We talk to them when they're back here.
Right.
And once they're back here, they have to use words to communicate with us.
Right.
They often say, it wasn't words. Nobody was talking. We just it was a mind-to-mind communication. We understood each other perfectly. And if I thought a question, I would get the answer. And it would be just in my mind. And I don't know how it got there. And yet when they talk to us, they have to put it in words. And so that's what they do. And knowing that that's oversimplifying things for us. An example is they almost always say that the other realm is timeless. There's just no sense of time over there. It's as if everything's happening all at once and happening forever. And yet when they tell us about the NDE, the near-death experience, they tell it as if it's a sequence of events. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. But you can't have a sequence of events without time passing. And when I ask them about that, they say, well, it's a paradox when I describe it to you now. But over there, it wasn't a paradox at all. It made perfect sense. But just back here in this realm where we have this man-made imposition of linear time, it doesn't really make sense anymore.
So, you've been immersed in this for decades now, but as a scientist with a very literal, logical way of approaching things, what was it like for you to initially step into this world of metaphors and the unseen or undefinable?
Yeah. Well, when I started off, I was a materialist, and I assumed we were going to find the physiological mechanism by which these illusions and hallucinations occurred. But as a psychiatrist, I know very well what psychosis is, what illusions are, what hallucinations are, and these were a totally different category of experience. These
You
were
mean
not.
You mean in the tone and quality of it? Like, how do you mean a differentiation?
Almost every way you look at it, they're different. The context in which they occur. These are normal, healthy, high-functioning people who have this bizarre experience that doesn't fit in their lives. The content is very different from psychotic symptoms. For example, there's consistency, not only between individuals, but across cultures and across centuries. The NDE is basically the same, no matter where it occurs. And yet psychotic hallucinations are very idiosyncratic from one person to another. You don't hear people telling about the same hallucinations. They're all different. There's a patterning and a sequencing to the NDE that you don't see in psychotic hallucinations. And the way they're remembered is very different. Hallucinations like dreams fade fairly quickly. I couldn't tell you a dream I had 40 years ago. But people who have a near-death experience never forget them. They're the same decades later as they were today. And in fact, I was able to do that since I've been doing this research for half a century now. I was able to go back and track down people I interviewed 40 years ago and have them describe their NDE to me again now. And we found that there was absolutely no difference in what they said 30, 40 years ago and what they say now about it. So unlike all our other memories of NDEs do not fade over time. But the most important difference to me between near-death experiences and other spiritual experiences and hallucinations is the way they change people's lives. People come back from a near-death experience transformed. Their attitudes, beliefs, values, behavior are totally different. And I don't know any other phenomenon that can produce this amount of change. And I'll make my living by trying to help people make changes in their lives. And it's very difficult work and takes a long time. And here you have in the near-death experience something that takes place in a matter of seconds or at the most minutes, and it totally transforms people for decades. They become much more spiritual. much more compassionate, much more caring, altruistic, and they become much less interested in things of this world, material possessions, power, prestige, fame, competition. What matters to them now are relationships and the quality of how we relate to other people and to the divine.
So is the integration back in always a smooth one?
Not at all. It depends on what your life was like beforehand. If you were kind of a spiritual person before, that just confirms everything you thought. But, here in the Western Hemisphere, very few of us are like that. We live in a competitive, materialistic world, and that poses problems. I've talked to people who were career policemen or military officers who had a near-death experience and were totally transformed. One fellow I knew was a Marine sergeant in Vietnam and was shot in the chest. And he had shrapnel all over his lungs. And he was airevac'd to the Philippines to a hospital. And during the operation, to clear his lungs out, he had a near-death experience, a very elaborate one. And when he woke up from that, he realized that we are all in this together. We're all the same. And shooting someone else was just absurd to him. That meant, shooting yourself, basically. But he was, after rehab, he was sent back into the field, into the jungle, and quickly realized he just could not shoot his gun. And he had to leave the Marines, which had been his lifelong career, and came back to the States and retrained as a medical technician. I've heard this from police officers. One person I knew was a career criminal who was transformed by his near-death experience. I've talked to people who were in cutthroat businesses who came back from an NDE thinking that getting ahead at someone else's expense just makes no sense at all anymore. As you hurt someone else and you're hurting yourself. And many of them leave the business world and go into helping.
Receiving the act of what they give into a depth that has a profound impact.
Right. Well, the life review, where you empathically feel what you're doing to other people, certainly makes it concrete for a lot of them. But even those who don't have a life review, just feeling the unconditional love from the divine, whatever that source is, that alone really transforms them. It makes them aware that, deserved or not, we are all loved and we all have the divine in us. And that makes them treat people differently when they come back.
So let's talk about the sensory experiences, because the sensory experiences, well, I'm not going to say it. So how does that enliven in these experiences and how they describe it to you?
Yeah. Again, we get stuck with the problems that there are no words to describe it. And they will say that their senses, vision, hearing, touch, and so forth, are much more intense, much more vivid than they are in everyday life. They say things like that world was hyper real. It was more real than this physical world is. They see colors they've never seen before. They hear sounds they've never heard before. And when they try to come back and talk about it, they fail. And some will, in fact, turn to nonverbal ways of expressing it. They will try painting or writing music to try to convey what they went through. I've also known people who had hearing deficits who heard perfectly in the near-death experience. Ken Ring has done a study of people who were born blind who had near-death experiences and could see in the NDE. So it's as if your senses become heightened in the NDE. Now, again, we run into problems with words because people will say, the blind people will say, yeah, I saw that he was wearing a red tie and it was really beautiful. But, they say, well, I didn't literally see it. I don't have eyes, but I knew it. And the only way I can describe it is to say I saw it. So we again come up with this problem that there are no words to describe what they experience as their sensory experiences are much more vivid than what we experience through our eyes and ears and skin.
I remember working with a woman on the palliative unit. She was younger, coming near the end of her life. And one day she just expressed to me this music she could hear. And her background was Christian. And she said she had the same challenge. She said, they're like the hymns from my childhood, Barb, but she said they have a quality and a tone in the sound I can't even begin to explain to you. And she said when people were out of the room, it was like it filled the room. And then when people came, it was like the radio turned down a bit so she could engage. And I said to her, well, how does it make you feel? And she said, oh, it's so beautiful. Now, I couldn't hear the music,
Right.
but it was so profound for her. Who was I to take that away?
Yeah.
Other than celebrate. And she talked about hearing that until the day she died, right? So even coming close in hospice work at near end of life, you hear them. I'm doing this because it's the senses, the sound, the taste, the smells. It's just the depth of feeling, because that came up in the research too, how deeply things are felt.
Yes. And of course, as you're suggesting here, people who don't have near-death experiences but actually go on to die have so-called deathbed visions, which are very, very similar to near-death experiences. And they will talk about being greeted by deceased loved ones that we don't see, but they're obviously responding to something.
Well, I recently did an interview with Dr. Christopher Kerr, who's at Buffalo Hospice in New York, and they're doing extensive research on deathbed visions and dreams. And even for me, I mean, at medical rounds, if the patient started seeing a loved one clearly who was coming to greet them who died, we go, oh, are they getting ready? We talk about it in medical rounds because it would happen so often, and you go into a section on that as well about initially going, okay, well, what about, is that kind of a hallucination, or what's the truth that?
I think these are to meeting deceased loved ones. It's very easy for debunkers to wish away as saying, well, it's expectation. You think you're dying, so of course you want to be greeted by loved ones, so you imagine that they're there to greet you. And that may be an explanation for some of the cases, who's to say? But there are a number of cases in which the person who is going through this experience encounters deceased loved ones that were not known at the time to be dead. And I wrote a paper about this about 12 years ago with dozens of cases like this from the literature. And there was even one case from ancient Rome. Pliny the Elder wrote a case about this in the 1st century, a very detailed one. But one of the ones that I was involved in was a 25-year-old fellow who was admitted to the hospital with pneumonia. And he was having repeated respiratory arrests where he couldn't get his breath. And he had one nurse who was his primary nurse, about his age. He was 25. And they got pretty friendly. And at one point she said to him, I'm going to be taking the long weekend off, so I won't see you for a while. And you'll have other nurses substituting for me. So she took off for the weekend. He said goodbye to her, and that was fine. And over the weekend, he had another respiratory arrest where he had to be resuscitated. And in that arrest, he had a near-death experience. And he found himself in a beautiful pastoral scene. And there, to his surprise, was that nurse, Anita, walking towards him. So he did a double take and said, Anita, what are you doing here? And she told him, you can't stay here. You need to go back to your body. I want you to find my parents and tell them, I'm so sorry that I wrecked the red MGB. And then she turned and walked away. When he woke up back in his hospital bed, he had a very clear memory of this whole experience. And he started to tell the first nurse who walked into his room about it. And she got very flustered and just walked out of the room immediately. It turned out that his favorite nurse had taken the weekend off to celebrate her 21st birthday. And her parents surprised her with a red MGB for her birthday. She got very excited, jumped in the car, took off for a spin, lost control of the car, smashed into a telephone pole, and died instantly, shortly before he had his near-death experience. There's no way he could have known that she had died or expected to see her or wanted to see her. And certainly no way he could have known how she died, and yet he did. And we have case after case after case of this that are clearly not wishful thinking and expectation, but seem to be encountering the spirits of the deceased loved ones.
Well, and bridging too to end of life work. You know, we hear about, and my father even recently passed, and the reality, the sense of realness of my mother who died being around him was just palatable, like just really strong. But I remember once being in medical rounds, and again, we're talking about someone nearing death, and there had been a sudden death within the family of this man, and nobody wanted to tell him that the person had died because he was facing his own death.
Right.
And then the family went in one day and he went, oh, I can't remember the name of it, but Joe showed up last night and came to me, and they all looked at him. They hadn't told him the person had died, and he knew nothing. And then the patient talked about the exchange, and they all just, you know, it was moving and touching and profound and out of the scheme of what they thought the truth of his knowing was, right? So
it's really hard for any of us who hear about these stories not to be profoundly affected by them.
Okay, so purpose. I want to go into that a little bit more because that seems to come up a lot. The person's in the middle of this experience and then they're sent back for a reason. Do they know what the purpose is, or how does that play out within the experience and coming back?
Well, it's variable. Some say they were given a choice and they chose to come back for a certain reason, either to raise their children or to help a loved one pass or something else. And others say they were not given a choice. They were told, your work is not finished. It's not your time yet. You need to go back. And some of them are very reluctant to come back, and they argue when they're sent back. Many of those who come back are aware of what the purpose was, or at least they think they are. But others do not know. They just say, I was told that there's a purpose, and I might have been told what the purpose was, but I can't remember it now that I'm back here. I know there's something I'm doing back here.
So if they don't know the detail, is it a deeper, compelling investment in life, and just even with that awareness, or how does that play out?
Well, they strongly believe that there is some purpose they were sent back for. And it's like it'll be manifested when the time is right, but they can't remember it now. Just sort of going through their lives, trying to live as compassionately as possible and having confidence that at some point it'll become clear to me what I'm doing back here.
It'll reveal itself.
Yeah. I mean, they're looking forward to their eventual death when they will pass over to this other realm again, but they're not in any hurry. They know there's a reason why they're back here, and they're content to play that out and let it happen.
So let's go into some of the more, because now we're talking about all this beauty and all this amazing, but then there's an arm of people when they have a near-death experience, it's not as positive. Can you talk a little bit more about the ones that are more challenged for people?
Sure. You know, when we first started doing this work in the late 1970s and early 1980s, we were relying on people to come forward and tell us about their experience. And all we heard were the beautiful ones, the blissful ones. So we thought that's all there was. And it wasn't until we started broadening our net and for example, interviewing everyone who admitted to the hospital with a cardiac arrest, that we started hearing some of the unpleasant ones. And there certainly are some. Most people who have studied this estimate that between 1 and 5% of near-death experiences are unpleasant or distressing in some way. However, we know that's probably an underestimate because these are very hard for people to talk about. Many people feel there must be something wrong with me because I didn't have a blissful experience. I had an unpleasant one. Am I an evil person? Did I do something wrong? Or they may just feel that they're embarrassed to talk about it, or it's too painful to even think about it. They tend not to talk about it, so it's harder to find those cases. We don't know why some people have unpleasant experiences. It's certainly not the case that saintly people have blissful experiences and evil people have bad experiences. I've got examples on both sides of the case, and we've got people who were in prison for life for murder, who had a heart attack in prison and had a blissful experience. And we know people who have had what seem to be saintly lives who have unpleasant experiences. That's not a surprise. We've got accounts from Catholic saints throughout the centuries who talk about the dark night of the soul, St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross. And it's like Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey. We have to go through this series of travails before you finally reach enlightenment. And that may be a part of it, that you have to struggle with these unpleasant things before you get to the blissful part of the enlightenment. But there are some hints that your personality may have something to do with this. For example, there's one type of unpleasant experience that seems just like the blissful ones, but they're experienced in a frightening way. People talk about being ripped out of their bodies and thrust down a tunnel at lightning speed and confronted with this blinding light, and they are terrified of it and they're trying to fight it and resist it. And these are generally people who have a hard time in life not being in control, like being able to control everything. And no matter what happens in an NDE, you are not in control of it. So that is a terrifying experience for them, and they resist it. And for many of them, when they finally get exhausted and can't fight anymore and they surrender, it suddenly becomes a blissful experience.
That's interesting.
So for at least some of these cases, it's your resistance to the experience that makes it unpleasant, not the experience itself.
Interesting. Okay, I want to move into the mechanics of this a little bit more, about consciousness, the brain. And so how does, in your research, how have you perceived the brain integrating these in relation to this other picture?
Yeah, that's a challenge, because obviously the brain is very important to our everyday thinking and perceiving. When you get intoxicated, you don't think as clearly. And when you get a stroke or hit on the head, that affects your thinking. So it seems as if the brain creates our thoughts and our feelings. But then you have extreme experiences like near-death experiences, where the brain seems to be diminished or sometimes totally offline. And yet our thoughts are clearer and faster than ever, and our feelings are more intense than ever. And that should not be if the brain is creating all these thoughts and feelings. So the NDE is a suggestion that the mind is not what the brain does, whether you call it the mind, consciousness, spirit, whatever it is. That part of us that thinks and feels and makes decisions and has urges is not a product of the brain. So what's the brain for? Well, there were other suggestions.
Good question.
Yeah, well,
Good question.
We've been struggling with this for a long, long time. 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates wrote that the brain is the interpreter of the mind, or the messenger of the mind. And he said that, the mind is somewhere out there, and the brain receives thoughts and interprets them so the body can understand it. Kind of like a television set will receive signals from somewhere outside and convert them into sights and sounds that we can appreciate. And it's not just a receiver, it's a filter. There are lots of television stations out there. And if you had signals from all of them at the same time, you couldn't sort them out and make sense out of them all. But the TV set will select one channel and then filter out all the others and just let the one in so you can then appreciate it. And the thought is that the brain is somehow a filter for the mind. And it lets in only those limited thoughts and feelings that are relevant to us. So what's relevant? The brain, like the rest of our body, evolved to help us negotiate the physical world. Your eyes receive light from the outside and only transmit to us a very small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that's relevant to our survival. Similarly, our ears don't hear sounds that other animals do. They just have a small range of frequency that they respond to. So it makes sense that the brain would also do this. It would filter out those thoughts and feelings that aren't relevant to survival in the physical realm, that don't help us find food and shelter and a mate and so forth. And you don't need to talk to spirits to do those things. You don't need to see deceased loved ones. You don't need to see a deity. You just need to know where's the food, where's the shelter, and so forth. So your brain evolved to filter out those irrelevant thoughts and just let in the ones that are physically important to us. There's evidence for this, not only from NDEs, but from other phenomena as well. For example, there's something called temporal lucidity or terminal lucidity. People who are nearing death, who have been demented for years and years and can no longer communicate or recognize loved ones, may suddenly become completely lucid in the hours or sometimes days before they die. And there's no medical explanation for how this can happen. People with Alzheimer's disease cannot regenerate brain cells afterwards. We don't know how it happens, but somehow when the brain degenerates enough, the mind can then flourish again. Likewise, we have neuroimaging of psychedelic drug trips that was done in the last decade or so. We used to think that psychedelic drugs produce hallucinations by stimulating the brain to hallucinate. And what we find is that the more elaborate mystical experiences with psychedelic drugs are accompanied by a decrease in brain activity. The electrical activity goes down and the coordination across different parts of the brain goes down. So again, it's like when the brain is knocked out, or at least the filtering part of the brain is knocked out, the mind can experience all sorts of things that it couldn't otherwise. So we suspect that one metaphor for how the brain works with the mind is that it's a filter of some kind that somehow filters out those, quote, irrelevant things like God, and just lets in the things that are important to us as a physical animal. Now, again, this is a metaphor. It's not a literal description of what the brain's doing. It's a metaphor for it, an analogy. And there are people who are working on what parts of the brain, what neuroanatomical and neurochemical processes in the brain might be doing this filtering function.
Just thinking about Alzheimer's, I had an opposite experience with my mother who had it for 12 years. And I'm on the west coast of Canada, and my father, and she came years ago for a visit, and she was just in the beginning stages of dementia. And I was at my sister's place on the island, and everyone left. We're in other parts of the house. And at one point, my mother looked me straight in the eye, and she said, "This is the last time you're going to see me."
Wow.
And I said, "Okay." And then she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Will you visit me?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Good, I would like that." And I said, "Later, will you come to me in a dream and let me know you're okay?" And she said, "Yes."
Oh.
And so I just held it, like I could feel some kind of truth was coming through. And then they went back east, and I didn't see her until about a year later, and I could not have the same conversation with her. Her dementia had progressed, and I wasn't so there was a profound moment there of a knowing. And she was preparing for me that we would not be able to engage in the same way. It was quite interesting. Yeah. Okay, so the Dalai Lama. You got to meet the Dalai Lama. Can you tell me about that experience and why that invitation occurred?
Well, this current Dalai Lama is quite a unique person. He's always been fascinated by Western science from the time he was a child. And in the last probably 15 years, he's led a program that he calls Science for Monks. Their educational program for becoming a monk is like getting a PhD here in the West. It takes about 15 years of education to reach that. But there is no part of what we call Western science in their training. And he realized that this is a great lack in their education. So he started bringing over Western scientists 15 years ago or so. every year to have a seminar for them to talk about Western science, astronomy, physics, geology, everything. And a few years ago, I got to be a part of that. And we were talking about the mind and the brain and consciousness. And it was a kind of a dialogue between Western scientists, such as myself, and the Buddhist monks. It was an interesting experience for me because when I talk to Western audiences, I often have to start talking about what is a near-death experience because many people don't understand. And with these monks, they knew all about it. Now, when it came time for the question and answer period, their questions were all, let me tell you about my aunt's experience or my sister's experience or something like this. They were very familiar with all of it. But what struck me most was my interaction with the Dalai Lama himself. He was talking about how both Buddhism and Western science are empirical disciplines, that we all look for the data, the physical evidence. And he said that comes primary in both Western science and in Buddhism. In Western science, if you have data that aren't consistent with your theories, like near-death experiences, you have to revise the theory because the data aren't challenged. And he said the same thing in Buddhism. If we find some facts that contradict our beliefs, we have to change the beliefs. But he said the difference between Western science and Buddhism is why you're doing this. Western science tries to understand the world in order to control it or manipulate it. Whereas Buddhists try to understand the world in order to live more harmoniously with it.
That's beautiful.
It certainly changed my thinking about why I do research. And I don't no longer go into, when I start a research project, I don't think about what can I learn about the mechanisms here, but how is this going to help humanity? If I do this research, how is it going to help people? And if I can't answer that, it's not a study worth doing.
So we're coming close to the end. So and bridging into that, the title of After, you explain sort of the different perspectives of after. Can you elaborate on the extension of that title?
Right. Well, most people think it refers, of course, to what happens after death. And it does to some extent. We certainly learn a lot about what may happen after death from near-death experiences. But most near-death experiencers say that what's most important to them is what they learned about this life, not the other life. So after refers to what happens after a near-death experience when you come back and have to live in this world. But I also wanted to refer to what happens to the readers, to us, after we read the book. There's lots of evidence now that just learning about near-death experiences can produce some of the same changes of an NDE. It can make people more compassionate, more caring, more altruistic. There have been a number of studies done with college students who take a class in near-death experiences, and they become much more altruistic in their behavior after the class is over. And this has been demonstrated in follow-up studies a year or two after the class is over. They're persistent changes. People become much more compassionate after learning about NDEs. So my hope was that in writing this book and letting people learn about near-death experiences, some of it may rub off on them as well.
Well, I know for me, reading or listening to the book, reading, of course, we had an engagement prior just because of my work and research, but there were two arms to it. There was the beautiful parallel of so many of the themes in the near-death experience we see at the bedside, like the sense of reality, meeting of the deceased, the language changing, but the pervasive element of love and the sensory experience is shifting to a deeper place, right? And then on a personal level, I felt like I had a whole life review because I lost a friend to a very sad choice of suicide at a young age. And then later, not at a near-death experience or end of life, had a breakthrough dream that was as lucid as a near-death experience with light and sound and her presence. And And when I came out of that, because I was struggling with the grief, there was just this whole different sense of a direction. And I made a firm decision and intent to follow my heart. And so all the way through listening to the book, I was having tears thinking, oh, Robert Frost poem.
Yes.
Two roads diverge in the woods.
Yes. Yes.
And I took the road less traveled by. Yeah. And that has made all the difference because it led me to do this beautiful work in end of life care, right? So thank you for that.
Well, we talk about the near-death experience as if it's a fairly discrete and unique experience, but it's only one of many ways of getting there to this other realization. And there are lots of ways of reaching a spiritual enlightenment other than going through a near-death state. That just happens to be one of the most reliable ways in our culture. Mm-hmm. But there are lots of other ways of getting this.
Mm-hmm. So now I'm getting all choked up here. But anyway, so last thing I want to ask you, because you, as you said at the beginning, you were from this materialistic family, a scientist, and I always like to ask the guest how their heart has been changed. Love seems to be the main theme in most of these experiences. So how has your heart been changed by doing this work?
I'm still a scientist, and I love looking at the material part of the world and trying to figure things out. But that's very clear to me now doing this work that that's not the important part of life, not the important part of why we're here and what we're doing. That what really matters is the heart and how you relate to other people, how you relate to the universe, to the divine. And that's really the understanding of that is understanding of why we're here. The material world is like a vehicle for us, but it's not us, and it's not why we're here. Why are we here? I don't know. I mean, there's got to be some reason why we're here in the material world. But what's important to us is the part that persists after the material world ends for us. And there's abundant evidence now that we don't die when the body dies. And that part of us that persists after the body dies is with us right here, right now. And if you can connect with that, that's the key to what's going on with us, really. And as you said, it often boils down to love.
I thank you so much for coming on as my guest today. I mean, the International Association of Near-Death Experience is an organization you helped launch. And a month or so ago, they had a tribute to you around the book. And I heard all these people coming on and thanking you. And the biggest thing I heard from people was the gratitude for your openness and curiosity, but also that you created a safe space for people to share that. And I don't know you as intimately as many of those do, but in the interaction that I've had with you, I just want to thank you for that as well, for your generosity in sharing the research, but also when I've shared things, how safe you've made it feel to explore that and express it, because that's rare. I try to do that in my work when things like this come up. And it's rare, but it's beautiful when you feel that sense of trust, right? So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thank you, Barbara, for letting me have this opportunity to talk with you. This has been really, really fun.
So for everyone listening again, he's got it behind him on the shelf there, the book After. It's a lovely book, and it's got a perfect balance of the research and the grounding elements of the scientific research and the flow and expression of the heart in the stories. So thank you so much again, Bruce, for coming on today. I really appreciate this conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, you take care.
Well, it wasn't quite the same as having Bruce here, but it certainly gave you a taste of what he's like and who he is as a person. And obviously, the work he has done has been outstanding and something the world has definitely needed and continues to need. So we have something on the chat page. Does anybody have any questions? Somebody asked about an unpleasant experience, and I wrote on there, Howard Storm had a hellish experience, and he's written a book about it, and you can find him giving what I think is the best presentation of his hellish experience on our website. He was our first speaker back in 2000, and it's the quality of the tape is not great, which I never see. After the first minute or two, I get so involved in his story. So I've got here a question from Victoria. The title after, am I clear about the meaning? Does this mean after the NDE coming back here? I believe that's what he was saying. It doesn't refer to the afterlife, but after your near-death experience, how you're changed and how it affects your life in this life is what he seemed to be saying to me. I thought the presentation was wonderful and brought up a lot of really good things that we don't often think about. Glad to see you made it, Brian. I see you here. I apologize again for being late and getting out the video today. This has been a day like, as I was saying before, it's a day like I haven't rarely seen. There have been so many things have happened, and I've got this incredible sore toe because I think I broke my toe this morning, and foot and or foot. I don't know what's causing the problem, but whatever it is, I'm very much aware of it. And let's see, Danny and Brinkley said you also felt the good things that you did and the effect they had on others. Yes, and you feel the bad things you did and the effect that they have on others as well. Yes, I believe that's true.
And may I think the judgment of good and bad is one I tend to avoid more as learning experiences, because we're the ones judging, we're not judged.
That's true. It's true. I agree with you completely. Can we say positive and negative? Because there's certainly a difference.
Well, there's certainly, it's like talking about the so-called unpleasant NDE has its purpose.
Right.
And things that we've done in our life that maybe we're less proud of, and we get to see the repercussions. That has its purposes too. And so seeing, wow, I did not like that. That's not who I want to be. I know that my life review I don't remember that, but I came back with some amnesia. But I tell people, I just want to make sure that when I die, that whatever my life review is, I'm going to enjoy it.
That's a really good way to look at it. That was terrific. Thank you. I like that. You want to make a good show for yourself.
Yeah, I do.
Yes, absolutely. I've talked to so many people who've not been pleased with what they've done, but they've learned so much from it, and it is life changing. There's no question about it. And Danny had said he was in the body of every person he'd ever interacted with, feeling what they felt as a result of what he did. That puts a whole new take onto the do unto others as you would have them do unto you thing that we've heard since we were kids. But there's a reason why people say that.
Well, I kind of feel that that's an after effect of my NDE, is that I feel other people and I feel my impact, I guess, or my presence, how they affect them. And then I can't always adjust it accordingly because it depends on them as well.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge sometimes to realize that we are really, especially as you pointed out, these are odd times, to realize that we're actually all one.
Yes.
And to honor that is become more and more challenging in a way.
Yes, it has. Yes. I was sitting here looking at, did everybody have the red scratches on their screen?
Mhm.
Yeah, I wonder.
That was part of the original video.
Pardon?
The red scratches were part of the original video.
That you think it's part of the original? Well,
Yeah.
what I watched before, it wasn't on there. What I watched before, I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it's original or if it's been added, and I don't know why. But it seemed kind of fitting for this day. This day has been one of those kind of red scratch days, and I sitting here looking at it, and I was thinking, you know, you could put all kinds of meanings onto red scratches on something. But I chose to feel like it was in preparation for the holiday season, where we use a lot of red and have a celebration of the holidays and good things to come in December. And that seems to me a better way of looking at it. Speaking of coming in December, Brian Clark, who's with us today, will be our speaker next month. And I'm just so thrilled that you're coming, Brian. And I just, because Bruce Greyson touched on a subject that is particularly dear to my heart, which is the fact of how close we all are to the other side all the time. And I've gotten messages years before I knew anything about any of this stuff, and never realized what they were. I used to ask for parking places, and I don't know how I got into that habit, but I did, and I got one. I didn't get one just half the time like you might think. I got one 100% of the time, every single time I asked for a parking place. My husband was music critic of the Chicago Tribune for 20 years. And we used to go to the Lyric Opera down in downtown Chicago on the by the bridge there. And he never once parked near the Lyric Opera until he got me in his life. And then we used to park in front of the opera, right in front of the opera every time we went. And he couldn't understand what this was. He said, you know, I've been doing this for years and I never parked in front of the opera, but when he had me in the car, I always asked my guides to get us a parking place, and we parked right in front of the opera every time. And he was dumbfounded about it. And finally, I felt guilty because I knew that this is not normal and that people wouldn't get a parking place in front of the opera every week just by chance. And so I figured there were some beings on the other side, or somebody was helping me and helping us get these parking places. And it wasn't just the opera, of course, it was every place I went. There was always one waiting for me. So
there is a joke about that, you know.
There is.
As you pull into the shopping plaza, you say, "Oh Lord, please get in a crowded shopping plaza, you know, shopping mall. Oh Lord, you know, please can you get me parking spot up near the front. Please, Lord. And then, of course, the parking spot appears and your response is, oh, well, never mind. There's one right here.
That's a good joke. But it wasn't any joke. It happened every single time to me. And I got to feeling so badly about it because I said, look, God and guides, whoever you're doing this. I didn't know anything about the other side at this point in my life. This was before I'd been to the other side, before I read anything about it, before I knew anything. And it went on for a long time. I said, I know that you could be helping other people, and so I don't really need this. I said, so don't worry about doing this anymore. You know, and take care of the people who really have serious problems and need to be helped. And then through a series of synchronicities, I got to know Sonia Choquette. And one of the first conversations I had with Sonia, and we got to be good friends over the years for quite a while. And I told her this, and she said, no, Diane. She said, your guides get brownie points for finding your parking places. You just go right ahead and ask them. That's what you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have those parking places, and that they belong to you, and they get brownie points for getting them for you. So you just go ahead and ask for them. So I went back to asking for them after that, but not just for that. You know, my guides are there for everything, and they've, as I was saying before at the beginning of the meeting, you know, they've always chosen the speakers for us, and for whatever reason, we don't have a speaker for January yet. But you know, I don't worry about this, and even at this late date, I'm still not worrying about it, because I know it's all in the hands of the divine, and whatever is supposed to happen will happen. So all I can say to you all is stay tuned and watch this, find out what's happened. I'm sure it's going to be interesting, no matter what it is. It'll be interesting. But my point was that these kind of messages come to people all the time. And so often something happens like you were just saying, Brian, you know, oh, never mind, I've got one. You know, that's, people just toss these things off like this. And Brian came at a point, and I have no doubt that my guides brought you to me, Brian. And he was saying, he talks about, Brian was on what floor was it on that you were on?
On the 84th floor of the South Tower.
Of the World Trade Center in 9/11. And the 84th floor, and the plane went into the 81st floor, I believe, yes?
Yeah, from 78 to 81, yes.
And he was right above that. And there were only 4 people, I think, that survived that.
Correct.
That were above the crash. And he survived because he had a voice that talked to him, and hands that pushed him in the right direction. So to make sure he took the one staircase that was viable to get him out, and he got out of the building alive. And your story is so magnificent because it illustrates what we all experience and most people don't pay any attention to. But once you learn to recognize and identify these little things, it's life-changing. You recognize that nobody is alone. We are all being guided. There's no one way to do anything. You are unique, your path is unique, and your guidance is unique, but it belongs 100% to you. And when you learn to pay attention, it's life-changing. And I'm just thrilled to have somebody who so beautifully demonstrates those things. And I'm really looking forward to hearing you share your story with us next month. So be sure to tune in. It will be a really good meeting.
I'll do my best.
I have no question. I know it's all divinely inspired. Does anybody have any other information they'd like to add, or anything else they'd like to say to Bruce's talk? Bruce will come back when he's better. I think he might possibly have to have surgery, or at least he'll need some time to. It's orthopedic. He's not sick from COVID or anything like that. It's a part of wearing out, as I was saying. You get to a certain age and you start to wear out, and that's the natural part of aging, which is a good thing, right? Where is it? I ran across a review of a book, and I've got it right here somewhere. And I might get the woman to come speak to it. She's not a near-death experiencer, but it's talking about aging from a spiritual perspective. And I think that's something that everybody could use some information about. It's really, I'm 78. I'll be 79 next June. And I'm just kind of amazed at the whole thing in a way. How when you're young, you look at old people, and when you get old, things look very different. And it's a time of a lot of different kind of lessons, and in a way they save the best lessons for last, because I think if you were younger, you couldn't stand some of them. But the bottom line is that we all survive it, and we all get through it. And when we finish, we go home. And it's not a bad thing. I just, I found the whole of life from the time I was a child until now to be really interesting and really exciting. And I have a 12-year-old grandson, and I watch him now. And you see things with different eyes. When you get older, you have much more appreciation and understanding for what's really happening. I know now that we come back again and again, and I didn't believe in reincarnation before I went to the other side, but when I came back, I knew it was true. And I have memories of past lives. I know I've had at least a dozen lives in ancient Egypt, and I've been through all kinds of unbelievable things. I fought in the Civil War. I died as a child in South America when the people that came to investigate different lands, like Columbus and all these people, they went to different countries. They brought all these diseases to South America, and I was a small child who died. I was the last one who died in our village, and I was about 4 years old. And we come and we experience dying young and dying old. We come and experience being Black. We come experience being white and Indian and everything in between. All different religions, all different genders. We come and try everything. The more things we come and try, the more we learn, and the better we're able to understand the world we live in, and the better we are to be compassionate and full, whole souls. And it's part of the soul's evolution, and all of it adds to our betterment. And so if you know this and you learn these things, then you can't look at anybody without love and compassion, because we're all part of the same soup, and we all contribute to it, and we all can help and love each other and get through more easily. So I see what's happening in the world right now is part of some kind of massive transition. I don't know what it is, but my sense is that we're evolving not to something worse, but to something better. But it's not an easy transition. There's a lot of, it seems like when the light gets lighter, the dark gets darker. One of the examples my guides gave me was to visualize two rooms, a room filled with light and a room filled with 100% darkness. And if you take take a little cube of that light room, and you put it inside the 100% dark one, what happens? Even that little bit of light gives you enough light to see. But if you take that cube of darkness and put it in the light room, it completely disappears. And that to me means that light is stronger than dark, that good or love is the most important and the most significant, and that darkness and the opposite of love, which is probably fear, dissolves when encircled by light. So if each of us becomes a light in the world, we can do an awful lot of changing of these things and make this transition easier. So go out and shine your light. That's all I can say. I'm so glad you all came today. And as I said, I don't know what's happening next time. We will have Dr. Greyson back as soon as he's able to be with us, because he's such a stunning soul in this universe. And we look forward to next month and for whatever comes beyond that. I don't know, but I'm willing to be guided, and I'm sure I will be. I can count on it. So take good care, all of you. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and come back to see us in December, second Saturday of December, and we will hear Brian's story. Thank you all.
I thought.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon had her hand up, and I just was curious as to what she had to say.
Absolutely. Who's hand?
Sharon?
Where are you?
Do we
Sharon.
have time, Diane?
Sharon?
Yeah, do we have time?
Sure. Yeah.
By
we
the
are.
way, that last, I used just a candle in a dark room. You know, that's enough light. And if you have a candle, no amount of dark can put it out, but I love the cube image. That's fantastic. What I did want to say was about reincarnation, because I've also had memories of past lives. But I got asked that question when I was doing a presentation 3 years ago here in Texas about reincarnation and did I believe in it? And I said, the answer I'm going to give you is going to frustrate you because, and this is relating to what Bruce Greyson said about no time. In the NDE, of course, I had no quote identity, no gender, no nation, et cetera, no age, no color. And no time. So if there's no time, I don't even exist now, right? If so,
I can't answer that question because, you know, I've contemplated that a lot. And, you know, there are some things that we, no matter how hard we think about it, we don't know the answers to. I let go of it all and I trust that it's all the way it should be.
yeah, the answer for me is that in the bigger truth, there's no time. But I obviously had a start date, and speaking of aging, I have a use by date, which seems to be rapidly approaching. You know, I don't know how long my shelf life is. And so if I've had one life, there's absolutely no reason why I shouldn't have others.
Why not? Yes.
But in the bigger picture, we're play acting because there is no time and there's no space. We've created this beautiful story of each other that we get to enjoy, and all the flavors you talked about and the colors you talked about and the eras. But it's even in the word history. It's a story. And hard to take it too seriously.
Nothing bad about it.
From my perspective, that's sort of like, and when people ask me if I pay attention to my past incarnations, I say I'm having enough trouble dealing with just this lifetime and the stuff I don't know about it. So I kind of leave the others to the to the past.
I haven't really had a choice because some of my past life participants are in this life playing out some of the things that were not finished in previous lives. And so, and I think that happens a lot to people. They just don't know, you don't, but that's all right. I think it just makes it more interesting.
I actually met someone in this life who was a master of mine when I was a slave in Georgia. And several of the people I knew then were meeting people from their past lives. And we decided we were going to try to work out our difficulties. And after 3 weeks, I told them to get lost. It wasn't working. So we'll deal with that in another life.
All come out at some point.
At some point, it's gonna, it'll have to come out in the wash. But I'm really looking forward to Brian's talk if I get a chance to be present for that. It sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yes, I'm just thrilled that he's coming. So happy. Yes.
Thank
Good.
you for doing this.
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for. I
For
have
a
no
long
doubt.
time.
I have no doubt. Anyway, okay. Anything else? We don't want to cut anybody off.
Somebody was asking if you are going to meet at Ruby's. Where are you at Ruby's? Are you out in the streets? No. This is
Ruby's,
just
Ruby,
probably it's just a
called-
joke.
it's called Rubies of Siam, which is a
Yeah, I
wonderful.
know. We used to go there when we were meeting in person. Yeah.
Right. And they're
Yeah.
still, they used to have a buffet lunch, which they don't do anymore, but now they have a lunch menu and it's very inexpensive. And they have you get about 6 different items and there's small portions, but there's plenty of food and it's delicious. And it's still going. I've been to lunch there quite a few times. It's very nice. But we aren't going there for dinner after the meeting. So I just
wishful thinking here. Okay, that's all right. Thank you, though. It was beautiful.
thank you.
The recording saved the afternoon. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thank everyone. Thank you to Diane and Vicky and everyone else. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
So we'll see you next month.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you to all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you to all
Thank you.
for all you do. Thank you.
Thanks. You're welcome. Thank